This week, we're going to continue our two-part series on the activities of various BSD foundations. Ken Westerback joins us today to talk all about the OpenBSD Foundation and what it is that they do. And of course, we've got answers to your emails and all the latest news on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 78, From the Foundation, part 2, recorded February 25th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting episode, lots of stuff to talk about this week. And we were just talking, I guess, Asia BSD Con's only a couple weeks away. So,
yes, so
we got slides to finish.
Not only that, but next week we'll be recording a double episode so that you will still get an episode while we're actually in Tokyo, because Wednesday when we normally record the show, it will be 2:00 in the morning on Thursday in Japan, I think, something like that.
Sorry, guys, that's not going to happen.
Yeah,
no live show.
No. So yeah, fun.
But we will
pre-record
pre-record something for you, and it looks like I'll be doing a tutorial. I guess I had done one. What was it now? 8 months ago, 6 months ago. It's been a while, but I'm going to record another video tutorial on PCBSD on how environments work and the new updater and some of the behind-the-scenes guts of all that. So look forward to that as a little tease while we're gone. There'll still be some good stuff, and we haven't missed a week yet, so we can't mess up our track record, Alan.
Exactly.
That's right. Okay, well, let's get into it since we're going to start talking about conferences anyway here. So it looks like the BSD-CAN 2015 schedule is now up and online. So
they haven't actually worked out the schedule yet, but they have the list of what talks were accepted, and now they just have to organize these into a schedule.
They got to sort them. Okay, I got you. I misread that then. My bad. But yeah, you can go ahead and take a look there. I know I got my acceptance, and you did as well, right, Alan?
I did as well. Kind of a couple of changes this year. First of all, obviously the date is a little bit later in the year, but they added a fourth track to accommodate the number of talks that were proposed.
It's growing, man, and they say BSD is dying.
I know. Well, I remember, the BSD conferences in Malta and Sofia had to expand to accommodate all the talks as well. And so BSD-CAN decided to do the same thing. Traditionally, BSD-CAN was bigger, right? Having 3 tracks instead of just 2, and now it's going to 4. So they accepted, a couple of these on the list here, because it's hard to tell because they're not in the schedule yet. But 4 of the items on this list are tutorials, so they'll happen the 2 days before the conference. And then a couple of the items are also like birds of a feather sessions that will happen during lunch or various other times, not competing with the talks, so that everybody has a chance to go to them after they get some food or whatever. But in total, there are 51 events scheduled, plus the other one is the BSD certification group.
Yep.
The exam. If you want to take the BSDP exam, and actually the actual practical exam, where you get a virtual machine and you have to set up X, Y, and Z in it on whichever BSD is your favorite, and then you'll be graded on how well you set up as per the instructions and so on. So that'll be interesting to see people running that finally. But
nice.
Yeah, so the big list is here. There's lots of interesting stuff, including Andrew Tannenbaum of Minix fame, who we interviewed a couple of weeks ago. We interviewed him a couple of months ago, but we aired a couple of weeks ago. He will be there giving his talk. There are lots of talks about FreeBSD and OpenBSD, some interesting stuff about ARM and high-density servers, and some more general stuff like, measure twice, code once, and stuff, but also multipath TCP, a bunch of stuff about ZFS. Matt Ahrens will be there talking about the new generation of features for remote replication. Not just the resumable send we've all been begging for forever, but also allowing you to do a diff between 2 unrelated snapshots and a bunch of other interesting features that will be a really big deal, I think. So I'm very much looking forward to that talk.
Yeah, I'll be sitting in that talk for sure.
There's lots and lots of interesting stuff. I
was going to say, so it looks like 50 talks. We got some notes here. I guess the breakdown kind of is as follows: of 3 NetBSD talks, we got 5 OpenBSD, 8 neutral, and then 35 FreeBSD talks, but no Dragonfly this year. But
well,
there's been some. Go ahead.
Michael Lucas posted over on his blog, which is covered in a second, kind of explaining, but it's not that we didn't want a Dragonfly talk; it's that I don't think anyone submitted one.
Right. So you kind of got to take the talks that get submitted as well. So there was some back and forth on Twitter a little bit about that, and you can take a look at some of the links in the show notes. But they said they will try to change those numbers around a little bit next year if they can.
Yeah.
So,
but
anyway, it still sounds like a fantastic conference.
Yes.
4 tracks, man.
Yes.
How are we going to pick which talks to go to?
Well, and how many are we not going to get to go to any of the 4 because we're going to interview somebody?
Yeah, that's right. The hallway track.
And on top of that, because apparently I was the only person that proposed having some BOFs, I'm in charge of all of the BOFs.
Well, see, now you got to delegate, Alan.
Yeah.
You're going to have to assign those to other people.
Yeah. So, well, I'll drag Matt into the OpenZFS BOF. Although that one, actually, I'm hoping to use it to generate a list of things to document. It's like, so all you people in this room that have been using ZFS, what are the little pet peeves that you've run into? What are the little gotchas and things you wish you knew when you first started using ZFS, so we can make sure those go in the documentation and so on.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, for the Hacking Lounge or BOF, I think it would be really cool if we had a session where we looked at speeding up boot times and shutdown times. Would be kind of neat. That seems like a low-hanging fruit thing where possibly some big improvements could be made in a day or two. But I could be speaking out of turn. Maybe it's a lot more complex, and I don't know. But that would be an interesting one.
Yeah, I'd love to take a look at some of that stuff in the Hacker Lounge.
Mm-hmm. But you guys, if you can, by all means, try and make it out. Don't forget this is a little later this year, so it's going to be June 12th and 13th, of course, at the University of Ottawa in Canada. Yeah. So try and come on out. Me and Alan will both be there, along with all the great speakers they've already announced.
And the 2 days before the conference starts, there's some developer summit and stuff going on, and lots of BSD people will be around the campus. But there are also the tutorials. If you want to learn about DNSSEC or NetMap, or I think... there are 2 other tutorials that one of them is FreeBSD storage by Michael Lucas, and I forget what the 4th tutorial. Which one is the 4th tutorial? Oh, it's Peter Hanstein's PF, building the network you need. Those 4 tutorials will be running. So if you can make it out a couple days early and check those out, I'd recommend them. They're all very good.
Yeah. You want to be there for the full 4 days if possible. There's just a lot of good stuff going on. Well, great. So, of course, we have our interview with Dan Legeel we did a while back, and we have a link to that in the show notes. So he runs the BSD CAN conference. So if you want to hear a little bit about how this happens, go ahead and take a look at that previous episode and get caught up.
Yeah, and previously we mentioned Michael Lucas' blog post, which you have linked in the show notes here. So he described kind of the criteria they used to pick the talks and the process they went through, and also just who's on the committee that decides what appears at BSD CAN. Right, there's Bob Beck from OpenBSD, David Maxwell from NetBSD, George Neville-Neal from FreeBSD, and Drew Levine representing the whole BSD community, and then 1 or 2 other people plus Dan, and they kind of look at the talks and decide what gets accepted. And this part of it is, it's based on what the person proposing the talk actually puts in the proposal. Some of the talks that might have got accepted in previous years because, previous years they've had trouble filling up the conference with enough content. This year they had so much content they had to be very picky about what they could accept. And so people with proposals that were 1 sentence instead of 2 paragraphs, it's like, well, that doesn't tell us enough that we think more people will be interested in this talk and so on.
Well, he had some good points in there, too. Like, they get a number of submissions where it's like, in no way does this even mention BSD.
Yeah.
So if you're submitting to a BSD conference, try and at least mention BSD in your talk somewhere.
Right.
I mean, and you wouldn't go to a Microsoft conference and submit something on Mac, would you?
Right. I can see that, a talk about Python or some other popular scripting language might be well received at the conference. But, this is a BSD conference, and...
so they have to give preference to the BSD talks first.
Exactly.
So, definitely check it out. Exciting. I'm looking forward already. And I mean, haven't even finished Asia yet, but I'm already looking forward to Canada. Yeah. So, exciting year.
Yes.
Okay. So, next up in the news. So, you probably heard this last week if you've read any of the tech news about the Lenovo Superfish. I don't know if you'd call it a scandal or kind of an outrage. Either way, they ended up pulling it pretty quick, so it wasn't a good thing.
And when we looked they looked into it further, they found that there's a common library that lets you do this, and it's being used by a lot of other applications as well, including some that are obviously malicious or just spyware and so on. And there was also the discussion about when doing this is permissible and when it's actually something that makes sense for companies to do. Yeah. Right. If you're a business and you're doing this on the edge of your network in order to filter your employees from going to Facebook or whatever, then maybe
but on a product you sell that some consumers
installing this on someone's computer without their knowledge is bad.
Well, for those we should probably give a little background first, Al, in case you missed it. It was the Superfish utility or app or whatever was installed on Lenovo's by default that was intercepting your HTTPS traffic and injecting advertisements.
Well, specifically, the way it did this is it installed its own root certificate authority into your trust. So now your browser will trust this new certificate from Superfish instead of only the list of of trusted CAs from your browser. And then what the software would do is intercept all your outgoing connections and then proxy them. So it would make the connection out to Google or Facebook or whatever site you're going to over SSL. And then it would re-encrypt the connection between the software and you and sign it with its certificate. So it would basically make up a fake certificate for Google signed by Superfish. And your browser would trust this, even though normally it wouldn't. It would say, "Hey, that's a fake certificate."
Yeah.
Because it was installed.
Man in the
middle. It was tricking your computer into accepting the man in the middle, basically. And then it would inject ads into your Google search results that weren't from Google, and so on, and various other pages. It's like as if the internet doesn't have enough advertising. Now you're having malicious software injecting ads on top of the ads that were already on the website you're looking at.
Yeah. Installed out of box on the fresh system you just purchased. Like you haven't even been on the net yet. It's already there. So,
and so this was doing SSL interception by doing man in the middle. Now, there's valid practice where this happens. A lot of like corporate level virus scanners will have a device sitting on the network that will do this in order to scan the content for viruses as it goes through, and a bunch of other similar things. And so Rick Floiter from OpenBSD was talking about his application RelayD, which is an application proxy. And it has a feature to do this with what he calls certificate splicing, where it can sit at the edge of the network and apply its rules, for example, to block Facebook. And so he talks about how it works and what some of the caveats are, specifically, in order for it to work, you have to install the certificate that you gave RelayD onto all of the client machines so that they'll accept it instead of giving a certificate warning every time you go to a website. So this is easy to do if you have a big Windows network or something and you just deploy it with Active Directory or, any type of corporate network, you have some system for pushing out files like that to every computer. So, in the case of a corporate environment, this is fairly easy to do. The problem is when, people are trying to do this on individual machines when they shouldn't be.
Yeah, sure. So there's all the details in here on how to do this and how you can accomplish this, of course, with RelayD. So use it wisely, folks. Don't use this for evil.
Yes. Specifically, they mentioned, if you're a company and you're setting up to do this, make sure that your employees are agreeing to it and that they understand that their internet traffic is being monitored, because depending on what country you're in, it's illegal to monitor them without telling them.
Sure. So yeah, of course, the post has all the details and sample configs. So that maybe someday we'll have to do a tutorial or something on that. But that's cool.
That is an interesting one.
Next up in the news, OpenSense came out with a new release, it looks like, this week. And of course, they've been doing a lot of rapid releases. So this one has some pretty notable big changes in it, though. It's first up, it's based on FreeBSD 10.1 with, of course, all the latest security patches, minus the ones that just came out this morning. But it also included some driver updates and some in-house patches. They've also added their own OpenSense update utility, similar to FreeBSD update, so you can upgrade between them. And of course, the security fixes for bind and PHP and some assorted bug fixes. They've also, it looks like, laid out the installation images a little differently here. We got standard CD USB images that default to VJ, as well as USB images that default to a console output. So if you have like a Socris or APU board or whatever, it only has serial ports. That's doable now.
To use the serial port. That's interesting.
Yep.
But yeah, nice. So they updated what OpenSense is based on to be 10.1, catching up with pfSense. So it's interesting.
So I guess they said also, they mentioned monowall shutting down. So they've been releasing their bare minimum hardware specs, and I guess trying to move into that space a little bit to make it run on lower end embedded. But interesting note here, they said, I don't know, TJ writes in the notes here that they were encouraged by PCBSD trying to cut ties with OpenSSL. I haven't heard from them if that's why they're doing it.
Well, it's interesting because one of the security updates that they're missing that came out this morning, or last night anyway, is actually about OpenSSL. So
I know, and that's like all the more reason why we're pushing hard to get rid of it too. But they're now providing experimental images built against LibreSSL as well, and they have some instructions for testing, which we have a link to in the show notes here. So if you want to take a look at that, try it out. We hope to do the same here soon. Still a little ways to go on that, but yeah, definitely try that out if you want to try LibreSSL. Okay, so next up we have some OpenBSD news on the MinoBoard Max. So, of course, we like to talk about it when people install BSD on strange, weird devices or something different. And usually this is where NetBSD comes up, but hey, we got an OpenBSD this week, so that's pretty neat. And it's specifically about the MinoBoard Max, which is a very small x86 motherboard that looks similar to a Pi. So it's pretty tiny, using an Atom CPU instead of ARM, and so the overall compatibility should be a bit better, and even has AES-NI, so crypto performance should be pretty decent on that. But the author describes how they set it up. He went entirely solid state with it, noting that there's no noise,
no 0 decibels, hard drive dying. And said that is very low heat dissipation, so you don't have to keep it in an air-conditioned room. You can even stick it in the closet, and very low power consumption.
Pretty slick. Yeah. So we have the link here to the instructions on how they set up OpenBSD on that little box. And the rest of the article's got all the details on the configuration and whatnot. And take a look at the spec sheet if you're interested. One thing I noted, it looks like they were using Core Boot for the, I guess it's a UEFI system, and OpenBSD didn't do UEFI yet, but the Core Boot image works. So that's kind of cool. So if you need an excuse to play with Core Boot, this may be a way to do it. Do you know how much one of those MinoBoards runs?
Not off the top of my head now, but
bet if I click the link, I can find out.
Interesting. He mentions that he's living in Japan, and so space is at a premium, so having a very small device is useful. Right. But he says he's also painfully aware of the relationships costs of having significant collections of legacy heavy iron. How many of us have a bunch of old machines laying around that are just taking up a lot of space and getting,
Well, that's not bad. These are only $99 for a single core 1.4 gigahertz,
and
or $140 for a dual core 1.33.
And it's an Atom CPU, so it doesn't need the same amount of fancy software as an ARM does.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, cool. That could be a way to replace an older system you have laying around. But yeah, definitely take a look at that, and it's cool to see.
Do they have these with multiple NICs?
Let's see here. IO. We have 1 gigabit RJ45, a couple USB ports. I suppose you could throw a USB NIC on there. I mean, if you had to. Yeah, I know you're still keeping your eye out for the one with the dual NICs, right? So you can make a router.
Dual Intel NICs is all I really want.
There you go. Somebody out there, make that happen.
Speaking of NICs, Intel was able to get some hardware over to Luigi Rizzo at a university in Italy. I forget the name of the university. Anyway, he was able to implement native NetMap support for the Intel 40 gigabit network cards. So NetMap is a framework for pushing the packets into the network stack more quickly. So it basically just maps memory and allows you to just shuffle the packets right into the NIC much faster. It's available on FreeBSD and Linux. And now the driver for the Intel 40 gigabit card on FreeBSD has support for this, and it's been committed to head and will be merged to Stable 10 shortly. He was able to do 32 million packets per second of transmit and 24 million packets per second of receive on a 2-port card just by looping the cable from one port to the other on the same machine. So the CPU utilization is obviously nice and low if you can manage to do all that on a single machine.
Dang.
And
that's pretty slick.
So this is actually the second 40 gig device that FreeBSD has full NetMap support for, which is...
What was the other one? Do you recall?
I think it's a Chelsea-O. Okay. Don't quote me on that, though. One of the other... There's not very many 40 gig NICs, so it's one of the other popular ones.
Sure.
And It says currently that makes FreeBSD unique, as it's the only one having support for NetMap on 2 of the most popular 40 gig cards.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I wonder how much a card like that runs.
A lot.
I'm sure that's not cheap.
The 10 gig dual port cards are over $500 a piece. So I can't imagine what the 40 gig cards are.
Oh, yeah. So what? I've never seen one with my own eyes. So what kind of cable does that take out?
My 10 gig one takes a standard RJ45, although you can get them where they have like a fiber connector thing.
Sure. Sweet. Yeah. Wow, that's still cool though. Hopefully we'll see some of these at one of the conferences. People tend to bring things like this, and then
especially
everyone gathers around like,
And if you needed to build a machine with a bunch of 40 gig NICs in order to push some serious packets, who would you just think it would be the best place to call to find out how to do that?
Right? Yeah, this kind of leads us into it here. But of course, IX System, the first sponsor this week.
Yes.
And of course, the URL, ixsystems.com/BSD now, where you can go and fill out all the info to get in touch with those guys. And they can tell you how they can push those packets out and, fulfill whatever the needs are.
I still remember that design they showed off on their website a little while ago with those like 12 10 gig NICs and one 2U chassis.
Yeah. And I'm sure they're saturating them.
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't put them in there for no reason.
Exactly, but they did some like custom metalwork or something to be able to jam that many NICs into that machine. It was awesome.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And they tend to go to a lot of the conferences too, where you can actually see some of the systems and whatnot. I think they were just at Scale. I'm not sure if that happened yet, but
yeah, that was last weekend.
Yeah, last weekend. So that's where you can go and run into some of these guys. But of course, when you get in touch with them, this is the kind of stuff they live and breathe. So if there's any kind of weird solution, anything small to a FreeNAS Mini up to these massive boxes with 40 gig NICs or whatever, I'm sure they could tell you how to make that go and what exactly you'll need to have that happen.
Exactly.
And of course, all with their white glove service.
And the burn-in QA process, right? You
yes.
order the machine, they're going to test it first and make sure it actually does what you want it to do, and then send it to you. So you make sure you don't get a system that doesn't work when it finally arrives.
So they build systems for all open source. Obviously, we'd recommend putting FreeBSD on it.
Right.
That is fantastic. But get in touch with those guys. Do let them know that we sent you. We would appreciate that. We're joined now by Ken Westerback of the OpenBSD Foundation, who's one of the directors over there. So thank you so much for being on the show with us this week, Ken.
Well, it's a pleasure. And as we all know, it's not the first time.
Right? To those who don't know, we tried to do this interview earlier, but had some technical issues. So we're really glad we could get you on today. And it looks clear and sounds great.
Yes.
So getting started here, tell us a little bit about yourself, what your first experience with BSD was in general. How'd you get involved?
Well, my first experience with BSD was so many years ago that I'm not going to tell you how many, but let's just say that BSD 1 was new and exciting. I took some time off for the real world for a while, and then in the late 90s, I got back involved with OpenBSD in particular and became a developer. And after a few years, when the foundation started up, I found myself on the board, and here we are.
Cool. So could you tell us a little bit of the story, how you became a member of the OpenBSD Foundation?
Well, as I was saying, to repeat the story from last time, basically I was taking a short break from a hackathon we were having in, I believe, Calgary, however many years ago it was now, and woke up, found myself in the middle of a meeting establishing the foundation, and by sheer numbers of people there, I found myself on the board and went over from there.
You woke up and somebody had put a name tag on you, like.
Well, exactly.
Right?
I mean, we don't do name tags, but similar.
Sure. See, that'll teach you guys.
We need 3 people. There are only 3 people here, so what the heck? You're in.
Yep.
Done. All in favor, aye.
Yep. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do on the foundation?
Well, I'm a director on the board of directors. I usually work with Bob Beck, who does most of the detailed work on the day-to-day basis. We reach out and try to accommodate people that need to have some sort of paper trail when they donate to the projects. We were established specifically to provide that when we had a number of requests, complaints, or whatever from companies saying, no, I can't just send money to Theo. That's silly. I need to have some paperwork, some actual corporate entity.
Sure.
So we established the OpenBSD Foundation in order to provide that corporate entity to allow these people to donate and make their bean counter divisions happy.
Yep.
So could you give us a little bit of background on what the foundation funds and the various ways it supports the project?
Well, the foundation funds a lot of the infrastructure for the servers in the development environment that are in the machine room, which is, as everyone knows, located in Theo's basement. Mm-hmm. We fund his electricity bill, which you can imagine adds up to quite a bit once you have a couple of racks in the basement of your house. Mm-hmm. Pay for the networking charges that he runs, that the companies that run to his house charge him. We pay for a lot of the hackathon expenses, which is one of the traditions of the OpenBSD project and related projects, where developers actually spend some face-to-face time to do concentrated development. Mm-hmm. And we fund some, not much so far, but some dedicated developer times when there are projects that don't fit in easily to the release schedule and the volunteer nature of most of the work.
Cool. So it's kind of an interesting follow-up question to that. What doesn't the foundation do that people might expect that you do?
Well, there's a lot of confusion, despite the fact that we've made some effort to dispel it, and because people draw conclusions based on the fact we have foundation in our name, and a lot of the other projects have similar foundations, except they have invested a lot of the ownership, control, and intellectual property in these foundations. We don't do that. We don't own anything to do with OpenBSD. We have no intellectual property. We don't sell anything like T-shirts or anything like that. That's not us. We are purely and only a funding organization. So we exist only to get money from donators, like I say, that usually want to have a paper trail, or these days they want to have Bitcoin and all this other exciting stuff that is just annoying to set up unless you have a corporate entity. And we funnel that money to the needs of the various projects that are related to OpenBSD. And that's all that we do. We don't phone up Theo and tell him what he has to do. We don't control developers. We don't hire developers. We just get requests from the community for funding, for support, for some worthy sub-goal or goal within the project, and we provide that money as we have money available.
Okay. So as you kind of led into there, so that's kind of a contrast to some of the other foundations. So you don't put a lot of money into coding projects. Could you tell us a little story why that is? Or
well, until recently, until basically last year, we were almost a hand-to-mouth organization. We had enough money coming in to cover those fixed expenses, as I was describing for the machine room, but we didn't have very much money beyond that. And anything that we wanted, we didn't want to make any commitments to developers, because if you tell someone that you're going to hire them for 6 months, they really would like to get paid for 6 months, and they'll be turning down opportunities to do other things. And we didn't really have those resources. There were a few smaller projects that we did get done. The KMS driver to allow us to get some more modern video support was the one project that I can think of. Though there may have been others in the deep dark past that I'm not bringing to mind. We're very hopeful that, given the amount of support we ended up getting last year, that we may have an opportunity to get enough money to do more of that. We have a number of projects that we would like to fund this year. We have some people lined up, so assuming that the contribution rate continues at its current clip and hopefully increases slightly, we will be able to do more of that dedicated development.
All right, so I guess on that note, are there any, I guess you said there was just the one you could recall of projects you funded in the past, but are there any other you funded in the past, or the ones you're most excited about funding in the future?
Well, the two that we're looking at right now that I can recall, there may be others again. Like I said, there's a bunch of developers talking amongst each other as to what really needs dedicated resources, what they're willing to do on their own normal basis. The first one is to push the multi-processing capabilities further into the network stack. Today's environment is obviously heavily multi-processing, since they've not been able to figure out how to make things go faster than light. So we need to have someone that really needs to spend a lot of time. Part of the hackathon that was just held in Brisbane was to lay a lot of the foundation for that, to do a lot of the investigation to see what exactly needed to be done to get to the next stage of allowing more and more of the network stack in particular to run outside of what we call the kernel big lock, which is the monolithic lock that traditionally Unix kernels use to protect the internals of the kernel. And the other one was, I can't think. I know the developer, but I can't remember what the project was. We talked about it in Brisbane. If I think of it later on,
right. And
I'll
then what's
but there were definitely two that we're thinking of. Like I say, assuming we can get the scope of that project, how much it's going to cost, and ensure that we have the money available and can be set aside, then we should be able to go ahead with that.
Cool.
So you mentioned hackathons. So tell us a little bit about the developer hackathons that are held regularly, and is the foundation involved with these?
Yes, well, the hackathon started very early on in the history of OpenBSD, predating my involvement. The first one I went to was the one they called C2K1, which was in 2001, and was held actually in Boston as an adjunct or as a parallel activity to the Usenix conference. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, it expanded up. Basically, they have one general hackathon a year, which is one where we try to get as many developers as possible into one place. Traditionally, for the first few years, they were always held in Calgary, often at Theo's house, or at least some of the social events were held at Theo's house, which, since we had some success in attracting new developers, eventually we outgrew that. Mm-hmm. After that, we held it for a few years in Edmonton, which everyone knows is just a little north of Calgary. And recently, we've tried to adopt an alternating year strategy of having one in Canada and then one in Europe, so that it would be less expensive for a lot of the European developers to attend, because many of them were complaining, well, it's a long way to Canada. We didn't think it was a long way to Canada, but they seemed to think it was a long way to Canada. So we've had a number of generals now. We've had some in Budapest. We had one in Budapest. We had one in Ljubljana. We're having the next general will be in Calgary again this year. Next year, we haven't been told by the powers that be where they're going to be organizing that. Historically, in addition to that, after the first 5 or 6 years of having that general hackathon, they also started to hold what they call mini hackathons or more focused hackathons. And there's been a whole series of them. There's a web page from the OpenBSD site you can visit with all the T-shirts and the sites. But they had one for routing, for instance. They have had one. They have one regularly for ports development. They have ones for networking, all kinds of, where you only have maybe 10 or 15 developers as opposed to the 50 or 60 that might come to a general hackathon, focusing mostly on that area. Not exclusively. People, if they want to, they can come to the hackathons and basically hack on whatever they want, but it's usually in those hackathons there's a core of people working on specific problems, and you can feed into or participate in that as much as you want.
Cool.
Okay.
And then the foundation usually funds the accommodations, the hack room. If there is a charge for the hack room, we often have it at universities. Sometimes the room is donated, sometimes not, but we pay for the accommodations. And for some flights, if particular for the specific hackathons, there's often a couple of key developers we have to have there to make any progress in the area, and sometimes they can't afford to come to Australia, for instance, or New Zealand. Then the foundation will fund travel in that case as well.
Cool.
Okay.
So OpenBSD has been participating in Google's Summer of Code for a bit. Can you tell us how well that went and whether you're planning to apply in the future?
Well, I would say we tried for the first time last year. We've had, I'm not sure if you could say complaints or requests or whatever, but there's been a lot of traffic on the mailing list of people who said that we should be participating in Google Summer of Code. And finally, last year, a number of strange paperwork issues that you always encounter when dealing with Google were solved. We figured out how to do that. We got everything signed up, and we had 5 projects accepted. So we had 5 Google Summer of Code projects completed last year. All went fairly well. Not all have resulted in all of their code being integrated into the actual project yet. Some code is being integrated. Some projects were specifically explorations of whether something was feasible or possible. The Capsicum one, for instance, there was a project for someone to investigate if it was possible or feasible to use Capsicum or introduce Capsicum in OpenBSD. And the overall consensus there was, no, that's not going to work out. So not much of that code is going to make in, but still the project itself was a success because the investigation was done. There were various tests made, and, the roadblocks were identified. So we have, for 2015, also applied. As of today, Google is in its, we're going to pick the organizations phase, so we won't know till, I believe, March 2nd when Google will announce all of the participating organizations, whether we're going to be in this year or not.
Okay.
Cool. Well, hopefully you get in.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, hopefully we get in, and we have a bunch of brilliant and penurious students apply and do all this hard work that we've thought of them for them to do.
So what's the core infrastructure initiative, and how is OpenBSD involved with this?
Well, the core infrastructure initiative, and I'm not an expert on it, but I do know something about it, is basically a group of large corporations that, as a result of Heartbleed in particular, had decided that it was obvious that many key open source projects were languishing due to a lack of funding. Basically, there were a number of them that only had 1 or 2 key developers, and obviously someone can fade in or out as far as their availability goes. So there weren't sufficient eyes on these projects to expose all the bugs that were gradually creeping in. And they've been funding, OpenSSL in particular has gotten a lot of funding for mostly programmers, I think, as far as I know. They've been able to hire a number of programmers to start investigating and cleaning up the code. They've sent some money our way for supporting the networking in particular. So, I mean, we don't, as the foundation, we don't normally tie dollars to specific things, but they knew that we're going to be spending that much money on networking, and they gave us that much money, so that pretty much has worked out. I believe they've committed to doing that for last year and this year and possibly going on forward. They've funded specific developers, I believe, as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that they're doing, trying to make sure that people that are producing these key components of the open source community have the support that they need to continue their work.
But yes, just thinking of what would be considered core infrastructure, obviously OpenSSH would be at the top of my list.
OpenSSH was the one that we pitched at them, as well as LibreSSL. Obviously, we think that is an effort that needs to have some significant support. We'd like to hire someone to do some dedicated work, but that's a really long-term project. That would take a commitment of a couple of years to attract someone that could be able to dig into that amount of code and make some significant headway the way we want to go. And so far, we haven't been able to convince. There's been a couple of people that have expressed interest in supporting that, but we haven't been able to get anyone to come and sign on the dotted line for a couple of years of dedicated support that we can rely on.
Okay.
So when you're not doing foundation-related work, what else do you personally hack on in OpenBSD?
Well, I hack on a number of things and have hacked on a number of things. I used to do a lot of work in a SCSI mid-layer, adding device drivers and fixing up the interface between the OS and devices. That's kind of died down in recent years. A lot of the variety of SCSI devices has vanished. There's only really 2 or 3 out there, and they seem to be fairly stable at this time. I've done a lot of work over the last few years in DH Client, basically getting rid of DH Client script and integrating all of the configuration capabilities within the code itself to eliminate a bunch of timing races and whatnot. And I'm working now on taking that to the next step and creating even more centralized configuration daemon for DH Client, if not more of the networking infrastructure. I do a lot of work on the install scripts. I did a lot of work on the install scripts in early days. Somebody from Sweden, I believe, Halex, now does more of that work because he's vastly more knowledgeable in the KSH, the shell programming itself. But a lot of that work for a few years and still contribute to that. And generally go around working on man pages and anything else that happens to come up.
Cool. Nice. Well, anything else you'd like to mention before we finish up here?
Well, I'd like to mention the fact that we just sent out to our lists the report on the foundation of 2014 activities and our 2015 fundraising campaign. So we have kicked off a couple of weeks ago our 2015 campaign, and we would really like people out there to contribute and let our support for these projects continue at the rate we'd like it to continue.
Cool. Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us this week, Ken.
Well, it was a pleasure to finally get out of the way. Struggles with Skype and travel and timing all to the side. I think it's worthwhile. And
so you are back home now?
I am back home now.
Okay.
That's exactly.
Well, great. Well, we're glad you made it back safe, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Okay, so before we hit into the news roundup, of course, we want to mention one of their sponsors this week, which is DigitalOcean. And, they've been a new sponsor over the past couple weeks. And we want to, of course, mention and really highlight that they have this awesome coupon code you can use, FreeBSD now, which will give you a $10 credit, so you can go set up your own VM up in the cloud, and that can last you 2 months.
Exactly. The VM is only $5 a month, so $10 credit is 2 months that you don't have to pay for. And they have
so that's a great deal for trying something out. I mean, that's a lot of free weekends where you can mess around on it and get it all set up the way you like.
In addition to the regular $5 a month plan, they also have hourly plans where I think it's 0.7 cents an hour or something like that, where it means that if you turn it off when you're not using it, you could stretch that $10 out for quite a while. That's a lot of playtime.
Definitely.
And,
of course,
they're serious VMs, though, right? You get they're all SSD backed, so you're going to get great disk I/O. They also have an API, so you can actually do this all programmatically. So, if you want to spin up a couple of instances for a couple hours at a time, or, automatically spin up more instances while under load and then spin them back down when the load's done, they have all of that with a simple API, or you can just use their very easy to use control panel.
Yeah, and they have a variety of different options available too, depending on how much horsepower you need or storage space and traffic and all that. So definitely flexible, and of course supporting FreeBSD in the VM now, which is pretty slick. Yes. So definitely go try that out. I mean, 2 months free to play around with that. That's a bargain, guys. Yes. So DigitalOcean.com. Go there, check them out, and if you talk to those guys, mention that we sent you. Yes. We would appreciate that.
Servers come with a 1 gigabit per second connection, and the cheapest plan includes a terabyte of transfer. And you also, if you go to spin one up, it takes less than 55 seconds from when you ask it to create the VM to when you can actually have it boot up. And they're all backed by hex-core bigger VM servers with ECC RAM and rated SSDs.
Dang. Yeah, so definitely go check that out, folks. There's a lot of neat stuff you can do up there.
And remember, they have locations worldwide, including San Francisco, New York, London, Amsterdam, and Singapore.
Yep, definitely. And they even have a nifty tool where you can check the connection rate to wherever you're at and make sure that that connection will meet your requirements. Okay, so heading into the news roundup, we just talked to Ken in our interview a little bit ago, but we have the hackathon report from the OpenBSD hackathon that just happened, and this is the second trip report from the very same guy we just talked to, but it sounds like Ken was also really busy getting a lot of networking things fixed and improvements in the base system. Added some new small additions for DH client, beefed up the privilege separation security, as well as some fixes for TCP dump and DHCPD.
So, I see they added an option to set the interface MTU via DH client. That's handy.
Nice.
If you want to have all the clients on your network use jumbo frames or something, that could be awesome.
That's slick. Yeah, that's good stuff. Keep up the good work, Ken. That's awesome. But it looks like they also, while they're there, he writes that they worked on FDisk a little bit. They allow OpenBSD now to properly wipe GPT tables on a previously formatted disk, so you can blow that away and then do a normal install on it. So that'll be handy. And there's also plans for DH clienting, presumably a big rewrite of DH client. So that could be some neat work to see what happens.
Yeah, the GPT thing is interesting because unlike a regular MBR writes only at the beginning of the disk, but GPT for to make it more resilient writes at the beginning and the end of the disk. So your BIOS, when it sees one at the end of the disk, it figures the one at the beginning is just corrupted, and it's trying to use the GPT partition table that doesn't line up with any of the stuff where your partitions actually are on your disk because you've overwritten it and wrote a new MBR. Yep. A tool to be able to do that is quite useful for that.
Definitely handy.
Although it'd be interesting to have OpenBSD support GPT formatted disks at some point in the future.
Yeah, that would be really cool. And my producer sends me a note. Apparently, I was trying to be too slick and chain that all together with DH client NG. It's DH client NG, so next generation. By the way, I wasn't meaning. Yes.
Package NG, right?
Yes.
And SNMP
DH client NG.
DH client NG.
Right. I was trying to sling it all together. But anyway, so that could be a cool new rewrite of DH client. So we'll keep our eyes open for that, and of course, bring you the latest news on it when that materializes. Okay, so next up, we have a FreeBSD beginner video series. Some cool links on YouTube now. A new series of videos have been started, and of course, they're on YouTube, as I just mentioned, which is aimed specifically at helping total beginners learn about FreeBSD. So
it looks like it starts with how to install FreeBSD, and then kind of an introduction to VirtualBox. Or sorry, it starts with how to get FreeBSD, so downloading it from the website, then an introduction to VirtualBox to actually get VirtualBox set up, and then how to install FreeBSD the simple way using the wizard or the manual way. Then it covers how the file system is laid out, how to add users and manage them, survival skills for editing files with VI. I heard a great joke the other day. My business partner was saying the other day, I've used VI for 15 years because I couldn't figure out how to quit.
Right.
Every new user's had that experience. Start up VI and it's like, how do you get out of this?
That's right.
They also covered Nano as an alternative for people that prefer that. And then they dig into deeper stuff.
SSH use as well.
SSH, how to set up an FTP server, how to stop the FTP server and configure it to automatically start at boot up, how to chroot users into it, how to use SSH, how to permit root login for SSH, which is a bad idea. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But it kind of walks you through all the different things you might be interested in doing, and I think that'll be a great series, and we look forward to that continuing.
Definitely. So we assume a lot of you folks who watch our show, you probably are familiar with a lot of this already. But if you're not, or if you need to introduce these things to your friends that are looking on getting started with BSD, a great place to get them started. Because, I mean, come on, everyone's got to start somewhere. And I got kids. I got to teach them all this stuff too. And heck, this is a great way for me to incorporate and this into some of their learning as well.
Yes, and kids love YouTube. So.
Oh yeah, right. They're all about them YouTubes now.
Yeah.
But today's newbies can be tomorrow's developers. So definitely encourage people to check this out and kind of get their feet wet with BSD. And we will of course bring you updates to that in future episodes when more videos are posted. So let's see. Next up, a NetBSD test. So it looks like they have a 0 unexpected failures. Wow, that's pretty cool. They got a new blog post up talking about their testing suite for all CPU architectures, and they've finally gotten the number of expected failures down to 0 on a few select architectures. So that's pretty.
AMD 64 isn't one of them apparently.
Really? So,
but what
are some of the ones they've got it down to 0 on?
Alpha, EVB ARM, EVB eARM v7, and Spark 64.
Okay, but it looks like
there's only a couple
failures on AMD 64.
There's just a couple on AMD 64, and you can see the number is down quite a bit. At one point, they were up at like 60. So
nice. Well, yeah, that's definitely pretty cool. And they've published the results in a handy page where you can take a look at everything on a special release engineering site. So take a look if you're interested. And the rest of the post links to some of the top performers, ones with less than 10 failures in the current branch as well. So take a look at that. See what NetBSD is running really well on. Okay, so last up in the roundup, I don't know why we always have these PCBSD items in here, but our producer posted something here about a commit I made this last week where we're switching some features around. I mean, you've heard we're trying to switch over to LibreSSL. We switched to OpenNTPDD recently, but one of the things we're doing now is actually switching away from the PF being the default firewall and going over to IPFW, which is FreeBSD's native homegrown firewall.
Yes. And I've been using it since like 4.0, 4.1.
Yeah.
And, when Luigi went and rewrote it and made it like super fast,
sure.
It's just, it's really my favorite firewall still.
So what are the benchmarks you've seen on that versus PF, Alan? I've seen conflicting things.
The ones I've seen recently were from Olivier, I can't pronounce his last name. We interviewed him in Sofia. He does the BSD router project, and he has a bunch of benchmarks. I don't have them handy at the moment. Do we have a link for that?
Yeah, I think there's a link to the BSD. I may even have it in the commit message there. But anyway, what I was going to say is part of the reason why we made this, which was not that we're getting rid of PF. It's still in the base system. So if you're a PF fan, no worries. You can use it. Not a big deal. We're not going to tell you what you can and can't use. But for default, we prefer to go with IPFW for a couple of reasons. And the biggest one being vimage support for jails, where you get an entire virtualized, basically NIC in a jail now. And IPFW plays nice with that. PF does not.
Yeah.
That's apparently doing PF with vimage. It leads you down the path of unhappy kernel panics and whatnot.
There's been a lot of commits about that recently, trying to improve that.
They're working on it.
Finally, because it sat with a known issue for quite a long time, and it's actually being worked on now. But IPFW has some definite advantages. Specifically, I've always been confused by when you use PF's logging infrastructure and it logs when rules block something. Rules have numbers in PF, but those numbers are just randomly assigned, it seems, and trying to actually find the rule number and match it back to the line in the config file is actually kind of difficult. Whereas in IPFW, you set the numbers when you create the rules.
Yeah.
It makes it a little more obvious how the
is
packets flow. And yes, I prefer the syntax too.
Yeah. Same here. That's IPFW is the first thing I used way back, in the day.
Yes.
2001, 2. I mean, geez, it's been a while. But anyway, we're just switching over.
I use it even more now that you can just load it as a module and you don't have to recompile your kernel to get it.
And the in-kernel NAT and all that just works, and it's really handy. So we're just making the switch. So it's going to be the default. We're going to flip on vimage here hopefully soon, probably in time for 10.2. And then your jails will be able to take advantage of that because there's a number of services that you can't run in jails without the vimage support.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think what some of the big ones were off the top of my head, but drawing a blank on them. But there's a number of them out there. I think maybe Plex was one of them. No, not Plex. Even running DHCPD in a jail I think is possible with vimage, but there's a lot of things you need it on for. So we just want to have it on out of box because unfortunately turning vimage on, it's not as simple as loading a kernel module. It's actually recompiling the kernel with the option on, and we would prefer to just have that available out of box. So yes, as TJ notes here in the notes, you may see me wearing a Keep Calm and use IPFW shirt here soon.
Yes. Interesting. I noticed another change in this commit where you disabled panic mail. Was there a reason for that?
We just weren't really using it. And we're trying to lock the system down a little bit and limit the number of things we're starting. Right. So we're making more things optional for people. So I'm trying to turn off the number of things that are on by default. So make it faster, make it slimmer, and keep people happy. Okay, so before we answer your feedback and questions for the week, folks, let's, of course, mention our other sponsor on the show, which is going to be Tarsnap. And the URL for that is tarsnap.com/BSD now, where you want to go get set up, put a couple bucks in there, and start trying out the backup service where you don't have to trust Colin or trust the remote end or where the data is stored because it's all encrypted before it leaves your box, which is the way backup should be.
There's a great quote from Michael Lucas about that because he's writing a book about Tarsnap. I'll try to find that quick. But the biggest thing is, everybody should have had a New Year's resolution to start doing your backups. And it's like the end of February. If you haven't fulfilled your New Year's resolution yet, that's your fault. So you literally you go to the website, you click a button, you give them $5, and you've met your New Year's resolution, right?
Right.
You also have to create a cron tab
for anything.
Yeah, so pay them $5, create a cron tab, you have backups.
There you go. And of course, you can trust those are fully encrypted. All the source is freely available, so you can confirm what it's doing if you don't believe us, which you shouldn't. Go take a look at it yourself, and definitely get set up with backups at tarsnap.com.
Yes, here's the quote from Michael W. Lucas. Tarsnap's design lets Colin fully comply with any legal, quasi-legal, or blackmail-driven demands while being utterly unhelpful.
Right?
So, if the NSA shows up at Colin's door and breaks his fingers and is like, give us Bob's data. And he's like, well, here. And they're like, well, it's encrypted. He's like, well, I don't have the key. Bob does. Yeah, right. Go bother Bob. Leave me alone.
That's right.
Exactly. So
Colin you should definitely be doing your backups.
No matter how much arm twisting he's subjected to, there's nothing he can do to disclose your data. Only you have the key.
Yep. Okay, so first up in the feedback and questions this week, we have Sean, who writes in asking about DNS at home. He says, hello all, hope this finds you well. I'm happy to see that PCBSD is getting some more OpenBSD in its blood with LibreSSL and OpenNTPD added to the base. Well, we're glad to use it. Those are cool technologies. He said, so I have a recursive unbound DNS server at home, and all my clients, he said about 5 to 6 of them, query it and don't use his ISP's DNS. This may make queries a bit slower, but I like doing ad blocking and having records of my machines. He says, how do you recommend setting up a secondary DNS server? Just copy the conf file to a second BSD box and put that IP in the Etsy resolve of the clients. I don't want to use bind, but I don't know if unbound can push and pull changes. Can it? What would you recommend?
Well, if it's just recursive and not authoritative, then you don't need anything special, right? You can just copy the config to the second one. If you're doing an authoritative name server where you're actually hosting the zone file, then you have to set up some kind of replication, whether that's, you have the zone file on both machines and you sync them somehow, or if the secondary daemon actually has the ability to do a zone transfer request and pull down the records that way. because that's a standard part of the DNS protocol. But if it's just a recursive server for looking up for your client machines, then yeah, you just set up Unbound on a second machine and problem solved.
Nice. Well, I hope that'll help you, Sean. Yeah, I just set up Unbound here from the ports tree, which is pretty cool.
Right, because
you can do with
Unbound is just the resolver, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's NSD that you would use or whatever.
Just using it for caching at the moment.
It's NSD if you're actually hosting a zone locally. So if it's just Unbound, then yeah, you can just set up a second machine and add it to the resolve.conf and problem solved.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
The other advantage to running the DNS server yourself is you don't end up with the problem that was it Josh from PCBSD had, where his ISP was faking his DNS results and screwing things up this morning.
That's right. Yeah, for whatever reason, he tried to pull packages down. It was sending him to some like search engine that the ISP hosted or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what I requested.
Yeah, that doesn't have the PCBSD files I'm trying to download.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so next up is Dan, who's asking about user credentials. He says, gentlemen, I have a security question for you all today. How does BSD protect credentials for users that are logged in or have logged in to a system in between reboots? Due to a recent Windows experience with the tools such as Mimikatz, displaying my 16-plus character password without breaking a sweat, I find myself wanting to know more about how BSD might have prevented this heartburn, I hope. Thanks for the time, guys. Looking forward to watching and listening to you all next week.
So, well, the most interesting thing about the way you actually log into a BSD machine, or really any Linux or modern Unix machine, is that the machine doesn't actually know your password. Which is makes it kind of different. It uses what's called a cryptographic hash, which is basically a one-way hashing function. So it takes whatever your password is and always compresses it down into this little string that's using a hash. And so because you're taking unlimited length and pushing it down into a smaller length, it means there are multiple different passwords that could end up with the same hash. And so when you look at a hash, you can't tell which one of those is the right one.
Sure.
And then we use salts on them so that if multiple users have the same password, they don't have the same hash, and so on and so on. But basically, the way it works is when you go to the login prompt and you type in your username and your password, it doesn't know if that's the right password. So it can't just, it doesn't have your original password to check it against. So what it does is it takes the password you tried to use, gets the salt from the hashed password in the password file, which is just a string of random letters. It's random every time you change a password. It generates new random ones. So it takes that random salt and your password and runs the hashing algorithm. And if the resulting string, which is like $, then a number that it indicates which hashing algorithm you use, whether it's like bcrypt or SHA-512 crypt or whatever, then the salt and then another $, and that's where the actual hash is. If you entered the same password and it was hashed with the same salt, it will always come out to the same string. So it just checks the salt, the password the user just typed in. If we hash that with the same salt as what's stored, are the two strings exactly identical? If they are, then they typed in the right password. If they come out slightly differently or massively differently, then they typed out the wrong password and they're not allowed in. So the BSD machine ensures that that it can't give away your password by just never having it. Now, obviously, if somebody puts a backdoor into the SSHD or something where they can record the password, that's different.
That's a whole other story.
In general, the BSD machine protects your credentials by never actually knowing them and storing them in a way where it can verify that you typed the right password without ever knowing the right password.
Okay, I hope that answered your question. Next up is from Florian, who comes to us with a follow-up. He said, hey guys, regarding running OpenNTPD in a jail, wouldn't it be possible to run one OpenNTPD on the host, which is setting the time, and is only reachable from localhost and the jail running the public-facing OpenNTPD? And if GNOME 3 setting for the editor is desktop agnostic, it's probably stored in XDG home or XDG config, which defaults to /config. He said, had to find this directory to change my config for the awesome window manager, and that's hidden there. So that's a reference to last week where somebody was trying to change some
they didn't want Emacs as their default text editor. So for the OpenNTPD one, you could probably have a OpenNTPD on the host. If you were going to do it, you probably have to do it this way. The OpenNTPD on the host would set the system's time, and then you could set up one in a jail to give that time out over the network to other people, and then you could ensure that that one could never change the clock, because when you're in jail, you can't change the clock. That would probably work. The one you run in the jail would have a little bit of difficulty connecting to like a USB GPS device, although you can actually decide to pass that device through if you want. But yeah, that seems like a reasonable way to set it up.
Okay. And to follow up with the GNOME settings, he said, I've also heard folks talking about some tool called GNOME tweaks or something like this to get the settings that the normal GUI doesn't expose. He doesn't recall if this was for GNOME 2 or if they're complaining that it doesn't exist for GNOME 3 yet. So take a look out there. You might be able to find some other utilities to help you mangle those XDG settings. And he says, your show is always a nice way to start on Fridays. Well, we appreciate that. Okay, next up is from Sean asking about INetD and FreeBSD. He says, hello all, show number 77 was great. I think out of the 77 shows the hosts have done, almost all the shows where we wear blue shirts. He said, I did recently see Chris wear a red shirt. Yeah, I say, I'm going black today. So
I don't know.
But people track that stuff.
Episode 77, I wore my blue OpenZFS shirt because we were talking about ZFS.
Right? Yeah, I did that.
But blue's my favorite color, so I have a lot of blue shirts. But most of my shirts are actually black, and that's why I'm glad when the conference gives out shirts that are not black or white. I like gray or blue is nice as a change too.
Well, a good 70% of my wardrobe is conference shirts at this point. I got so many of them, and then the rest are various Star Wars and other shirts.
Mine started as a giant collection of ThinkGeek stuff, but now it's kind of been supplanted by all these awesome conference shirts.
That's right. So back to his question, though. He says, I have a question about INetD from here, and then he has a link to the handbook for FreeBSD. He says, it looks like you have to run INetD. You can have INetD run a daemon as someone like www, but INetD will still run as root. And then he shows us here that INetD was running as root. He said, I know the lower port may force it to run as it root regardless, but I first attempted 8080 and still ran as root. It would be best to put this in a jail and be done. Is there any privilege separation with INetD?
Well, INetD doesn't actually do anything. So what INetD is, it will listen on the port on the low number, like 80 or 81 or whatever, and then it will spawn, when somebody connects, it will spawn the program that you specify in inetd.conf as the user you specify in the config file and run it that way. So it basically is a privilege separation daemon, although not quite in the traditional sense. Yes, INetD will run as root and listen on the port, but because you have to be root to listen on a port less than 1024, but then it will spawn the program that actually will interact with the user as the unprivileged user. So it's actually making it easier for you to run something on a low port without that the code actually running as root.
Having root.
It's doing what you want. But you can run it in a jail, and if you prefer, that works great. But yeah, INetD always runs as root just because of the way it's built. And you have to be root in order to then start something as another user, right? As the user Alan cannot just start a program as Chris. You have to be root in order to do that. Or you can use SU if you have Chris's password. But
Okay, next up, speaking of Chris, Chris writes in with a Poudre question. He said, hey, I have a delicate issue with jail data sets. I'm running Poudre in a jail. I'm the author of Poudre in a jail article.
Yeah, that we featured the other week.
Yeah, he said, Poudre creates an additional child data set. He said, however, since these data sets are not specified in EasyJail's config, where only the root data set delegated to the jail is listed. And then he lists the command here. He said, of course, I know I could specify all Poudre's data sets in that file in the host, but this is a tedious task which screams for a better solution. What is the best way to issue a ZFS mount-a command in the Poudre jail? Would you put it in @ZFS tab or @ZFS tab on the host or jail? What should I write into those files? Thanks for your help and the great show.
The interesting thing about this one is the answer is that you do it the same way you do it on the host system. Basically, what he's missing, once you delegate the root ZFS data set into the jail, what you need is ZFS_enable equals yes in rc.conf in the jail. And then the etc rc.d ZFS script will mount all the file systems and apply all the settings when the jail starts up. So basically, you just have to do.
It just runs what? ZFS mount -a.
It runs ZFS mount -a and a bunch of other tweaks and so on. You don't need to put them in your FS tab. You just need to tell the jail that it has ZFS.
Okay, very cool. Well, I hope we answered your question there, Chris. And thanks for writing that other blog post. That is really cool. Keep up the good work. So next up, we have our mailing list goal for the week. And first up is version control system FlameBait, which I'm all in favor of. Did you see this one here, Alan, where somebody's looking for an alternative way to get sources on OpenBSD, it looks like?
Yes, because CVS
is too slow.
When you're downloading individual files at a time, it is kind of slow. But I was like,
Sure.
Don't they offer a tar of a CVS checkout that you can just do CVS up to get the updates after?
Yeah, and several of the people mentioned too, you can just grab them off the release CD as well.
Right, yeah, because I think the ones that they ship on the release CD already have the metadata too, right?
Yeah, it comes with the CVS directory, so that's a good starting place.
Although the one I noticed is when I was checking out the other day, when it finished, but it hadn't, or I canceled it and it hadn't timed out yet or whatever, when I tried to run it a second time, it was like, hey, you're already connected, you have to wait. I'm like, well, hurry up, I'm trying to do a show.
Right. Well, so this next one here, Alan, I'm not sure what to make of this
Ken
one. I'll let you read it.
Oh, the Satanic Agenda of Pope Francis. So this was sent into the FreeBSD GNOME mailing list for some reason.
Of course.
And it's, a very, very long diatribe about religion and I'm not sure what else. And
yeah. Honestly, my eyes glazed over by
there
the
are
first
many,
two sentences.
many paragraphs.
Yes, it is quite long, but why do people subscribe to lists to send this stuff in? I don't know.
Yeah. This isn't just spam, and it doesn't seem like it's actually trying to change your opinion on. I have no idea where some of these things on the internet come from.
That's right. People out there have too much time on their hands. So.
Then there's an interview in line in this. Yeah. Some investigative journalist interviewing Illuminati people.
It's pretty crazy.
The longest email I've seen in a while.
Yeah, it was one of the longest ones I've seen to the list in a long time.
Yeah.
But speaking of having time on your hands, if you have time, send us something. We would love to mention it in next week's episode. So, of course, you can send us your questions, comments, show ideas, or topics. Or if you have a story you found and think, hey, this should be on next week's show, send it in to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll try and throw that in for you. Of course, some extra emails would be great this week because we're going to be recording 2 episodes next week to make up for the fact we'll be in Tokyo. Yeah, so we need twice as much email questions. So if you have something you've been meaning to ask and haven't, send it in this week, and we will get to it next week's recording.
But also, even if you had a question and you found the answer, but it's a question many other people would probably have, send it in, and we can answer it, and it'll be easier for people to find out the answer later.
That's right, because 10 to 1 says if you've had the question, somebody else has too. So we'll try and help answer it for everyone at once. But also, if you're going to make it out to Asia BSD-Con in a couple weeks, be sure to come by and say hi. Me and Alan will be there. I'm sure we'll run into you. Maybe we can interview some listeners as well and ask you guys what you're doing.
That was
BSD.
an email that was sent in asking, they saw it happen one time on BSD Talks, and they're like, it's great to interview all these developers, but I want you to interview more people like me and find out how regular users got into BSD and what they like and what they would like to see changed and how we can help them.
Yeah, that would actually be a cool episode, a whole episode devoted to users' experience and what are they looking for in the next generation of BSD. That could be neat.
But hopefully we'll be able to do that at HBSDCon and at BSDCan, because I think we'll probably find a couple more users at BSDCan.
So I got to decide, am I going to fly to BSDCan and try and chance it again? Although Delta goes direct out of Atlanta now. Maybe I can make it this year. Or I can just drive.
It'd be a pretty long drive,
either way.
though.
It's a day and a half. It's not bad, but as long as the weather is better than it has been.
Well, it will be it'll be warmer and
in June.
Sunny. And
stuff. Be a heck of a lot nicer. But we also been doing the Foundation series, talking to people from the foundations, and we've already interviewed the NetBSD Foundation back in episode 12. And Dragonfly BSD doesn't have any foundation at the moment, so there won't be a third part in the series, but we hope you guys enjoyed hearing about what the various foundations they're doing for their projects. And of course, try and come back and be with us next week as we record the next couple episodes live.